reflections on this kind of experiential product development. So the first thing is it's deliberately kind of upside down. You kind of begin with the sense of romance, and then you kind of work out how you can actually build product via it. This makes it very, very challenging to explain to technically minded people, because if you have a kind of causal sense of creativity where you begin with a kind of goal and then work forward in a kind of responsible fashion, you don't really get to do this sort of stuff. But there is, at the end of it, a kind of creative energy which comes from just jumping in. And I was made to reflect on this great quote from Goethe, which is sort of leap and the net will appear. The net being the thing to catch you, by the way, not fishing net. Anyway, so this was kind of a kind of unusual thing we did, which has really kind of helped enchant the product. And it's very, very different to how we work on learning effectiveness. So learning effectiveness is a huge challenge for a bunch of reasons. First of all, cognitive science has actually shown surprisingly little interest in empirically studying learning effectiveness. There's hundreds of different studies which show minor versions of learning effectiveness in specifically controlled lab conditions, but how those ingredients are combined and how they connect with emotion and engagement and so on is very obscure. And of course, there's 100 sort of learning startups out there who talk about kind of optimizing learning, but you can only optimize against what you have. You can't kind of optimize out of nothing. So this is a kind of huge challenge for learning effectiveness. And we've kind of approached this thing in two ways, one of which is to kind of try and engage and inspire the cognitive science community, and the second is to do our own kind of in-house experiments. So first, I'm going to talk about our external efforts. And we have a investor who's always trying to persuade me to turn Memrise into an open source project. So Matt Mullenweg, who founded WordPress, but he's got this great line, which is the people outside of your organization are inevitably going to be more knowledgeable and smarter than those within. And so we kind of took this to heart, and we did an applied science competition. And the basic idea, because it hasn't really been studied in cognitive science, was to say, OK, let's get the top 15 cognitive science labs in the world, incentivize them with a $1,000 prize, and then so we created a kind of particular experimental condition where they had 1 hour to teach people 100 words in a foreign language, and then there was a test a week later, and they had to basically show that their methodology against a control condition, which was designed by UCL, could produce the goods in terms of learning outcomes. And so we persuaded quite a cool number of labs to participate. Rather amusingly, MIT didn't make it, sadly, into the second round. And they complained that their students were too clever, therefore the control condition, it was difficult to show a result. So lots of really cool labs got involved, and it was quite an inspiring process, interacting with these people vastly more knowledgeable than ourselves. And we paused for a second to consider what's required in this kind of thing. Yeah, and so the basic thing of the next stage was, feel free to slide on the slide for me if you like. But the next stage was that we took the top 5 of these experiments, which were done with kind of empirical conditions in labs, and then we built them out on a special version of Memrise, and then we put tens of thousands of users through them. And so 4 of these methods showed more than a doubling of learning effectiveness against the methodology of flashcards, which is actually pretty good, flashcards, because you kind of get to do a lot of the things. And this is the team who came second. That's Chris Summerfield there, who's got a lab at Oxford. He also spends the second half of his time training neural nets at DeepMind. He's like the world's best trainer of neural nets, which is probably the future of work for many of us. And what they did was kind of crazy interesting and gave us a whole new approach for thinking about the underlying way of modeling human learning in a kind of interesting fashion. And now I have a kind of another video, which I'll try and explain as it goes, which sort of shows on the left the kind of y-axis is the number of words as they're introduced, and those little dots underneath are when repetitions happen. Here is one dimension of memory, which is effectively the chance you have of successfully recalling the item at a different point in time. We're going through 80 items here. And here is a second dimension of your memory, which is how the memory fades. And so this one you want to be high, this one you want to be low, and you want to optimize the repetitions to be able to deliver optimized kind of learning experiences. So it's a really cool methodology, which has also got some technical features, which allows you to sort of run machine learning against it. And that's how we're kind of rebuilding some of our core learning tech. And so, yeah, I mean, it was good. It was a great competition for a few reasons. One of which is it kind of gave us a feel for where we stand. And actually, one of the most interesting things was the kind of 4 people who doubled learning speed came up with wildly different methodologies. It was kind of fascinating because you think maybe there's a kind of state of the art, but there isn't really a state of the art. gave us a litany of like little micro tweaks we could make in the learning product to drive effectiveness and some new ways of thinking. One thing to say about academic collaborations is they take a long time. So it took us about 3 years from beginning to end to actually kind of produce these results. And so it is, if you're going to kind of engage communities like this, it's a super long-term bet, but you also establish collaborations and ideas as you're going along. And one of the people from that team, a woman called Hannah Tickle, is now kind of advising us on our learning tech, and so we work with her on a weekly basis. So that's been a nice bonus too. The second thing we're doing on learning effectiveness has to do with internal experimentation. And so here, this is our learning research team. Mario from Germany, Matilda from Italy, Shah from China, and Anne from Denmark. And they are language specialists. They have degrees in developmental psychology. They have loads of stuff, but they're not product managers. They can't code, and they can't build stuff themselves. So we empowered them with a special tool which allows them to configure to a high degree of accuracy learning experiences and gives them a lot of flexibility about how they configure those learning experiences for teaching, respectively, phonetics, grammar, speech, and kind of lexicon. And we allow them to run loads of experiments. So we typically have kind of experiments like this, get someone to say words out loud, get someone to mime them in their head, test them on the tests you might get in this learning condition and on that learning condition, and see how those abilities generalize. And this is very much a kind of ongoing work in progress, but it allows us to learn at an extraordinary rate. And I've got a little sort of comparison thing here about experimenting in product versus experimenting in prototypes. And so if you experiment in product, you're going to get a couple of devs. It normally takes a month once you actually factor in the fact that you've got to launch it and you've got to deal with the bugs, et cetera, et cetera. And it costs you, if you're kind of in the kind of let's look at the account sort of thing, it costs you about $50,000 generally. Of course, you can go faster, but it costs you about $50,000 to run an experiment and learn one thing. But with a kind of optimized prototyping setup, you can actually go about an order of magnitude faster in your learning. And that's not the only advantage. There's also the fact of kind of emotional commitment. Once you've actually built something, it's quite upsetting to then kind of unbuild it. But if it's just a prototype, you're like, OK, well, we'll do another one. And so that's cool. Right. So two things then, external and internal. The problem with the external one is it's very slow. The problem with this kind of prototyping approach to internal stuff is you do kind of end up with like a fourth code base. So we kind of have iOS, Android, web, and prototyping tool. And so, we've got some sort of plan to try and kind of actually bring them together and allow our actual product to allow people who aren't technical from just a basic sort of back end to run experiments continuously there. But that is, of course, a big technical investment. OK, so finally thing is like broad appeal. So how do we create broad appeal? And people are very, very different. The first thing we kind of have done is we built a really diverse team. So we have 40 nationalities. And this is quite fun. This is us, by the way, returning. We've just been on a team expedition to Iceland. And the only time we thought to make a photo was in baggage reclaim. Yeah, so this is a team. And they come from 40 different nations, and they have very different opinions. And so we kind of allow this very wide range of kinds of ideation to bubble up through two methods, one of which is the prototyping I've talked about, and the other one is hackathons. One of the first things you discover about opening up ideation really widely is that people have ideas which you disapprove of. And that's kind of part of the game, I suppose is the point. And so here's one example. So I don't know about you, but I consider karaoke to be a form of decadence. But Shah, who's from China, thinks otherwise. And she kind of uses karaoke apps. And so she built this learn mode, which was where you have to kind of dub yourself over videos of native speakers, and then have the weird disembodied virtual reality experience of your voice coming out of someone else. And I was like, what is the point of this, Shah? And she was like, no, it's really cool. It gives you the emotional experience of speaking a foreign language. And it turns out that it does. So we'll just see if we can play this video. This is either a Chinese person or me. And if we get the volume, let's try it again. So who thinks that's a Chinese person? Who thinks that's me? Who thinks it's a Chinese person? Not as good as I thought I was. And then I got another one, but the game is run. Anyway, it's kind of interesting to think. And And so my own experience doing this is sort of like, fundamentally there's some kind of implicit sort of prejudice in everybody. And I sort of Chinese people haven't looked at too many. It all looks a bit strange. Maybe I'm not the kind of person who can speak Chinese. But you hear your voice coming out of one of these people. You're like, well, maybe I can do it. Next slide. And so, then a second thing we do is like hackathons. And so this is like to set free the kind of tech team. So we do them every 6 weeks. And again, it's ideas you don't necessarily think are a good idea. This is one which a back-end dev of ours called James and Andy prototyped a few weeks ago, which is now in the product. And basically the idea is turn the world into a visual dictionary. You look at objects, use deep learning to recognize the object. It's like a spoon or whatever. Anyway, so we've actually launched this now. And it was quite fascinating, actually, the process of going from prototype, which we got working in 2 days, to actually training it. And it's like, it's quite strange and philosophically interesting what things get kind of confused. And Christina, head of product, who's now VP of growth, had to spend hours in the evenings getting hundreds of photos to sort of disambiguate a beard from, a house and things like this. So this has been a kind of cool source of cool ideas. The kind of challenges and reflections are that, ideas you don't necessarily personally like can thrive, which is great. You do, in this sort of thing, have to give everyone the experience of a kind of a product manager, which is to say that, like, if it isn't good enough, then it may have to not continue to exist, which actually it turns out that not everyone is emotionally ready for this kind of setback, so that needs good communicating. And for us, it can also kind of overcomplicate the product potentially if you just have so many ideas and the rest of it. So delighted to have a very competent product team to kind of bring all the madness under control. So this is kind of how we kind of think and approach these different things. The goal really is to help people fall in love with and learn a language in a few short months. We've got a long way to go in that, but once we get there, that's going to be kind of complete dynamite. And it requires these very different and diverse modes of thinking, none of which sort of come under the umbrella, really, of classical A/B testing, etc. They require kind of quite specific and interesting techniques. And a bunch of our team are here. So we got Luke from Australia, Christina from Estonia, Esther, who found my slides last night at about 5:30, and was like, are you really thinking of presenting in public with these? And has made them look very nice. So small round of applause for Esther. Thank you, Esther. And then we got Olivia from Mexico, Kevin, our head of product, who's English, Tuba, who does all the user testing. You can have a chat with her. She's from Turkey. And Guillaume, who does lots of clever stuff in teaching learning tech and grammar, who's from France. So thank you very much.